Hi guys, my name is Nour, founder of Inverse Finance. We are an on-chain DAO that governs Dola stablecoin. And in this talk, I'm going to guide you through how to create your own stablecoin. We're going to go through three things: how to make a stablecoin, some of the biggest lessons learned from stablecoin protocols, some of the biggest players and the mistakes they've done, and what we work on, so Dola stablecoin, okay? First, a quick intro about me and us, Inverse. I helped build Dola stablecoin, which at its peak reached about 100 million in TVL. We've been here for almost 5 years at this point, doing the exact same thing, focusing on the exact same thing. Stablecoins, lending in particular. I founded Inverse DAO in 2020, which governs Dola and also governs our fixed rate lending protocol firm, which is the only way you can borrow for a fixed rate for any duration, so like 100 years, if you will. And DBR is also a product of ours, which allows you to tokenize interest, speculate on it, fix your interest rate for future loans. We're going to talk about all of that in this presentation. All right, so before we talk about how to build a stablecoin, we're going to talk about what it is, right? For a token to be stable, we need it to be absolutely, priced at $1. So this is a screenshot from Coinbase, right, for DAI, and the mid-market price of DAI is almost always at $1. The bids and the asks are always meeting there. So we need to control the market, and the word control, I think, is the key word here. The whole purpose of a stablecoin protocol is about control. We need to be stronger than the entire market of buyers and sellers. We force all of them to buy and sell at $1, right? Another way to look at it is relatively speaking. So this is the absolute price. This is the relative demand and supply. Relative supplies of stablecoins to each other can be looked at in pools where they are paired together. So in this screenshot from Curve, this is the Curve 3 pool, the very first pool on Curve, where you have USDT, USDC, and DAI. You can, looking at them, at the ratios of their supplies that are paired together, you can see which ones are relatively, I would say, less than $1, or relatively depegged, as we would call them. So you can see 13% USDT. That implies that USDT is what? Is it higher or lower than $1? Anybody knows? Higher than $1? Right, the supply of USDT is lower than the rest, which means the rest, there's more supply than demand for each of these stablecoins compared to USDT. So USDT is relatively stronger than the rest currently, when this screenshot was taken at least. So we know even if a stablecoin is not, they're all at $1 here, but we can tell before they're depegging, before they become less than $1, before there's a problem, we in the stablecoin industry can tell. You can see people on Twitter telling, oh wow, something's going badly, but still, like, you could see USDT at $1 and don't know what's going on. Or you can see, for example, others at $1 and you don't know what's going on. Well, this is what's going on. One of them could have, sometimes USDT itself was like 90% of the 3 pool supply, and that was terrible. That means it was very close to maybe catastrophic, depegging, or as we call it, or just dropping under $1. Anyway, so this is how we usually measure the performance of a stablecoin, absolutely and relatively speaking. Okay, let's go. So again, this is all about control. You have to be, if you're a control freak like me, you'll love working on this stuff. We have to be always, not only controlling through code, but even through information sometimes. And we have to deter the market, including shorts and longs, to not fight us. When they say, don't fight the Fed, this is the Federal Reserve, right? This is kind of similar to that. We have to make sure that no one fights the protocol. So how do you decide the price of any asset as an issuer, or really as anyone? You individually as a person, you could do what we do if you had the power to control either supply or demand of any asset. So think of, you want to fix the price of gold. if you had the ability to create an infinite amount of gold, you can set a price ceiling on gold. And if you basically control the entire supply of gold, you could set its price. If you could set the entire amount of demand of gold, you could set its price. So it's the power of demand or supply. If you're able to change any of the two, whenever the other changes, then you can change the other, which you control, to set price, because price is a function of supply and demand. So unfortunately, we cannot control demand. We can only reward it. We can try to nudge it. We can try to push it in a direction. But we cannot create infinite demand. What we can control, and this is the trick that stablecoin protocols use, is supply. What we do when I'm talking about here are mostly decentralized stablecoin protocols. We don't just control supply, we own all of it. So every DAI that you own in your own wallet sits on MakerDAO's balance sheet. MakerDAO, the issuer of DAI. They consider it a property of Maker. It's also the same for DOLA. We consider every DOLA the DAO's property. We allocate it, we lend it to borrowers, and then borrowers will give it to other people maybe. But we have the power to force these borrowers to give us back our DOLAs, right? We're the issuer of DOLA. So the keyword here is recallability. We own the entire supply of the stablecoin, and therefore we can control the supply. We can increase the supply by lending more, or we can decrease the supply by asking for our loans back, by raising interest rates, for example. So control of supply is the key here. So let's talk about a classical collateralized debt position stablecoin, which in this case refers to something like DAI, like DOLA, maybe MIM, if you guys are aware of it. They all really work kind of the same, liquidity. Let's look at how they work. So the idea is there are two things that happen in two different scenarios. One scenario is when the price of the stablecoin rises above $1, and the other is the opposite, when it goes under. So what happens when it goes above? When, let's say, a stablecoin is at $1, say 5 cents, borrowers are then incentivized, new borrowers maybe, or existing borrowers, are incentivized to go to the protocol and borrow new stablecoins and sell them at higher than $1. Hopefully, when it goes down in the future, they're going to be able to buy it back for less. So that's kind of, they're shorting the stablecoin. So that's kind of a classical idea of a CDP, at least that's the idea. So there's an incentive to borrow when it goes over $1. And then holders are incentivized to sell it. If you hold a stablecoin and it goes to $1.05, that's a great time to sell and make an easy 5%. And in this case, the protocol will also lower interest rate. So us, make like Inverse, the protocol, the issuer of DOLA, or MakerDAO, issuer of DAI, would lower the interest rate to incentivize shorts or borrowers to borrow more, so lowering the cost of capital or borrowing, and then to disincentivize longs. So we would not want to give as much yield as before so that people would stop holding it. We need them to sell because there's clearly too much demand. The opposite is true when it goes under $1. Under $1, borrowers then buy it at a cheaper price. Existing borrowers buy it at a cheaper price than they've sold it at in the past. So if it's like 95%, well, now I can repay my loan at a 5% discount. So that's good. Holders also buy it, for a discount. If a stablecoin is at 95 cents, well, maybe you can buy at 95 cents and it goes back to $1, then that's a nice arbitrage. These are usually called stablecoin arbitrageurs. And then here's the interesting part. Interest rate is raised by the protocol in those situations. And we're going to go through examples of that very, very soon now to deter shorts. And this is the point where it gets really interesting. We want to tell shorts who are borrowers, if you borrow now while the stablecoin is under $1, you're betting against the price of the stablecoin, you're going to pay, and you're going to pay a lot. And we're going to keep raising rates. And the idea is that we have the power as a protocol to raise rates to infinity. And usually just this piece of information alone is enough deterrence. So you can't find us if you want to short. You can short, we're going to charge you 10, 20, 50, 100%. And that did happen in many cases. So, and also an incentive for longs, because we can pay longs, we can pay holders. So for example, in the case of DAI, through SDAI, a rate to incentivize them to buy. Okay, pretty clear so far. So what you're doing here is you have a two-sided market. You can look at it that way. You have holders of your stablecoin who are also your lenders. You can think of this as a lending protocol, this whole setup, who are also your suppliers. If you think of it as a business, these are people who are supplying your product. They're not your customers, at least in our eyes, because we pay them. They don't pay us. So they're actually a cost. And they're also the longs of the stablecoin. They bet on the stablecoin going up. Oops. And then you have the opposite. You have minters of the stablecoin who are actually borrowers. And they are customers. They pay. They're the people who this whole business is built on, and I think a lot of stablecoin projects forget that. These are our paying customers, and we serve them. We don't serve holders, and that might be a surprise. Actually, the holders serve us in a way, because we pay them, so we are their customers. Anyways, minters, borrowers, they're also shorts. They bet against the stablecoin. They would benefit from it going down in price, because then they could repay their loans at a discount. So you, as a stablecoin protocol, your job is to grow and maintain both sides always equally. And if one of them goes out of balance, your stablecoin's price goes, over $1, under $1. Both are terrible situations. We're going to talk about that. You also have to make a profit, or at least break even in the process by having some kind of margin between the borrowers and the lenders. And then you have to face new competition every new week, equipped with more and more VC money, more token rewards. Your competitors are always probably losing money as well, so you're forced to lose money. So, yeah, good luck with that. All right. Let's talk about, this all sounds, simple, I guess, just to an extent. In theory, let's talk about failure modes, because it's not so simple. Otherwise, you wouldn't have so many stablecoins blowing up in every single way, every year. So, first failure mode. This is a classical one, right? Supply is higher than demand, so your stablecoin price goes down. So in this case, Go by Aave was consistently underpriced. I think up down to 96 cents at some point, as soon as it launched. And it was a huge kind of effort to bring it back up. They had like this whole like committee and effort and marketing effort, etc. But the problem here is that when Aave launched their stablecoin, they didn't consider the fact that they needed a demand-side incentivization. You need to remember, holders are not a charity. So while Aave were letting people borrow their stablecoin, they were not giving any incentive for holders of Go. There was no reason to buy Go. There were all the reasons to borrow and sell Go, but who's going to buy it? You need to pay someone to buy it. It's not for free. I'm going to talk about that actually a little bit in a few slides. So you have to think of, if you're increasing supply, you also need to increase demand. If supply increases but demand stays constant, this is what happens, right? That's what happens. Okay, now the opposite. Demand is higher than supply. Well, that should be good, right? It's good to have demand, but what about too much demand? In the case of DAI, when it was just launched, their stablecoin was consistently at up to $1.05, which sounds good if you're a DAI holder, but that's the end of it. Who's going to buy DAI now at 5 cents at a premium? No one's going to buy it because they know it can go down to $1. So it's just really, there's nowhere for DAI to go at that point. And anybody buying DAI when it's at a premium is going to lose money. So they had to find a way to fix that. But why did that happen? The problem here, many people never understood back then, was that leverage is not infinite. Meaning, if your stablecoin's demand is people buying it, and then the supply is people borrowing it, these two are not always equal. Sometimes you have more people want to buy your stablecoin. That's what happened with DAI. Everybody wanted to have some DAI because it was a decentralized stablecoin. It was the only one back then, censorship-proof, etc., decentralized, all that. But then not many people wanted to borrow it using ETH, whatever. So they found out that problem and fixed it in not the best ways, but honestly, there were not many options. They used USDC as a way to mint it, etc. But it is a big problem, actually, largely unsolved. And this is why a lot of the RWA people are basing their whole premise over this problem. There's no other solution that we know of so far. Open problem, yay. Okay, so what's next? Counterparty risk. I mean, this is kind of an obvious one. USDC, you see here, they've had a pretty, I mean, everybody almost forgot about this. Maybe some people in this room never heard of this. Have you guys, who here never heard of USDC price going under $1? You've all heard of it. You've all seen it. Okay, good. Well, basically, what happened here is that Silicon Valley Bank went broke, and the reason it went back up here is because the Fed intervened. So thank you, US government, Federal Reserve. This whole space owes you everything. I guess if you base your stablecoin over a dependency, you have to make sure it doesn't fail. And I guess people were thinking, well, US banks are not going to fail. Well, they did, but I guess maybe they were right because the Fed didn't let it, fail entirely. So maybe we can all use the Fed as a dependency. But the idea is, in general, is you don't want to. You want to minimize your dependency risk in general. Banking is one. Oracles is another. Another stablecoin maybe. A custodian. If one thing fails, the whole thing just can be completely gone. That's almost what was going to happen with USDC if the Fed didn't intervene. All right, now this is a fun one. Can anybody tell me what's going on here? So above we have the LUSD supply, so liquidity, and below we have the federal funds rate of the US Federal Reserve. Anybody has any idea why there's some kind of correlation? So, all right. So basically, LUSD, when it was launched, the first version of LUSD had 0% interest rate. And the idea was that as a borrower, you don't pay any interest. And as a holder, you also don't get any interest, basically. And it was fine because it's cool, right? Like free loans, yay. But the problem here was that this whole time, when liquidity was doing so well, the interest rates on the federal funds rate were 0, basically. So, they were technically at the market price. What liquidity team didn't realize was that this is just a 0 interest rate phenomenon. Then the Fed kept raising rates, and then suddenly, because liquidity did not have any way to change their interest rate of their protocol to charge borrowers more or to give lenders more, suddenly they became below the market rate, and suddenly everybody left liquidity, everybody flocked to some other, US bank or some other stablecoin that would give them a higher rate, higher than 0. Anything higher than 0 would work. Liquidity basically died over time because why earn 0% when you can earn 4.5% on US bank or on DAI or anything? Every other stablecoin did, but this one couldn't because it was immutable, so there was no way to upgrade it. So when you're thinking about your stablecoin, think about this chart. But maybe maybe it was the LUSD guys who didn't think about this stuff, a lot. Maybe they were new and all, but not really. It wasn't just LUSD. I guess the Frax guys didn't consider that either, because they didn't have any way to incentivize holders. Because why? Why incentivize anyone when everybody's willing to deposit for free? Because money was free. But as soon as money was no longer free, everything went down. But it's not just Frax, it's also MIM. Never consider it. All right, so maybe it's just the newer projects, the smaller ones, Not really. People always talked about DAI having organic demand. DAI never had organic demand. It was just the normal rate of 0% that everybody was earning on DAI because money was free, and then once money was no longer free again, people expected some other alternative. People expected other opportunities that could earn them 4%, 4.5%. Then they left DAI and looked for something else. But then DAI later on reacted and they increased the SDAI rate. And that's when demand started coming back, right? So it's interesting here. Even DAI was hit by this problem. The largest and the oldest decentralized stablecoin. And even USDC, you know, you could see a little bit of a slope here until the Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. That's when everything went downhill, but even before then a little bit. And people think USDC is a great business, you know. They're not paying anything, they're paying 0%. They're not. If you've seen the latest Circle IPO filings, they're talking about how much distribution costs they're having. They're paying people through Coinbase wallet, through Coinbase products in general. They're doing some deals with other projects to incentivize. So they look like they're not paying anything. They are. They're actually losing money. And they're having big problems in evaluating their company when doing the IPO because of how much money they're losing. So even Circle is losing. I mean, everybody's losing in this business, basically. All right, so when you're designing a stablecoin, the lesson here is to consider all interest rate environments. And organic demand is a zero interest rate phenomenon. It does not really exist if there's an opportunity cost to that organic demand. No one wants to hold something for free which they could earn something on alternatively. And maybe RWAs are the opposite, actually. Maybe RWAs are great now because of the high interest rate phenomenon, because you can earn 4 or 5% on a T-bill, but what happens when it goes down to zero? Are RWAs going to be around? Maybe it's the current, also temporary phenomenon. Anyway, all right, let's talk about DOLA. We don't have much time. Enough talk about other projects. So let's talk about DOLA's design choices. Oh, here we go. DOLA is our stablecoin. It is a crypto collateral only stablecoin, no RWAs. And transparent on-chain governance has been around for 5 years, been governed from the very start by on-chain holders, no company, no et cetera. You know, the entire history of hundreds of proposals is available. You can look at it on-chain. Our main differentiator is fixed rate loans. We give fixed rate loans for any duration. You can have a loan with a fixed interest rate for 100 years. And we tokenize also our interest rate. So we're going to talk about that right now very quickly. But the idea is, unlike other projects that we've talked about, maybe here some of them, we don't decide our interest rate. We don't have a fixed, like a specific interest that we decide or we set as a protocol. We have a market-driven mechanism so that it adapts to different, environments. So how does that work? It works through DOLA borrowing right, and that is the form of tokenized interest. We tokenize a right to borrow. So we got rid of interest rates, and then we replace it with a utility token that represents the right to borrow. And then we issue an equal amount of those tokens than the lending capacity that we have. The cost to buy that token for a borrower is equivalent to interest rate. So for example, if you're borrowing $1 for a year and you pay 5 cents for this token, this is equivalent to paying 5% APR as a borrower rate. All right? And we also have a supply rate. We give those tokens to lenders as well. So this is also known as DOLA, but we're not going to talk about that now. We're going to talk about DBR. One DBR as a borrower allows you to borrow $1 per year, okay? So, as for example, if you buy one DBR for 5 cents and you borrow $1 for a year, that's equivalent to paying 5% APR. But it also works in the way that you can borrow $2 for 6 months. You can borrow $1 for 6 months by using 0.5 DBR. So the DBR is basically being burned over time during that duration, depending on how much you're borrowing. And the rate of burn depends on the amount that you're borrowing. All right. So use cases here. That means, let's say you want to have a loan for 10 years of, let's say, $1,000. You can buy 10,000 DBRs, and they will last for 10 years. You can even do it for 100 years. And that means whatever happens to the interest rate environment in DeFi or in the world, really, your loans are fixed. And a lot of whales and DAOs have used that actually to their benefit recently, have saved millions on costs of borrowing using DBR in the recent months. Fixed rate for future loans. You can buy DBR and not use them. I think that's one of the more interesting use cases. You can use them later. So, you might want to have a loan in the future. We're in a low interest rate environment, which we might be coming to soon when rates are being reduced by the Fed. So buying DBR 2-3 cents and then using them when the rates are higher would be a really good savings tool, but also you could just sell it, and it's a way to speculate. You could just sell the DBRs at a profit. Buy it in 2 cents. Some people did that. Bought them at 5 cents and sold them. What here is went up to 25 cents, so 5x, betting on interest rates of DeFi. All right. So let's talk about DBR issuance policy, because basically we need to have we need to make sure that this system can also be used well to regulate the DOLA supply, right? Because we talked about other stablecoins like DAI. Their models were all about adjusting interest rates as a deterrence or an incentive. So we need to make sure DBR also does that for DOLA. So let's see how that works. So when DOLA is over $1 in price, the issuance rate of DBR is increased. So more DBRs are given away, or basically sold. Oops. So DBR becomes cheaper to sell because there's more of it, and then people take more loans, which increases the supply to make the increase in demand. So pretty simple. What happens when it goes under $1? The issuance rate of DBR is decreased or paused, causing a supply crisis. DBR then becomes more expensive. Borrowers then start repaying to sell the remaining DBRs that they have not yet used. So maybe they've had a loan for a year, then 6 months in, they've used half of their DBRs, so now they can sell the other half because it's gone up in price, making a profit, technically making it maybe a negative interest rate on that loan, which is really cool. So not only fixing the rate up to a 6 month in, but also making money after. Then supply also falls because people start repaying their loans, which means demand. So it works. It really works. It's been actually working for over a year and maybe a year and a half now. And you can see in this chart, you can see it in action actually. Wait, actually that's basically 2 years. Wow. I just realized. You can see in the green the issuance rate of DBR. And it's done through auctions, it's done through basically a supply rate, giving DBRs to holders of DOLA. And you can see in orange the burn rate. And the burn rate is borrowers who are consuming DBR every second. This is the annualized rate. People, for example, at the peak, they were burning over maybe 60 million DBRs per year, a rate of that. Anyways, issuance rate is also the same. You can see it going up and down, and then the blue line is the price of DBR. And you can see that the price just moves in correlation with the ratio between those two. So for example, you can see in the middle here, right? The price went down because the issuance had increased significantly. So in a way, we don't, as a DAO, Inverse does not decide the price, directly set the price of loans or DBR, but it does have control over the issuance of it, the supply side of it, which allows it to push it down or up when the lending capacity has increased or decreased, to incentivize more borrowers or less borrowers, or to incentivize more people to, basically, when DOLA is going over $1, under $1, this is the main lever that we pull as DAO. So, okay, what's next? For Inverse and for DOLA. So we are working now, just like we have, fixed rate loans for 100 years, which is only possible really, by the way, on Inverse. I'm not talking about DeFi, but in the world, or in TradFi even. There's nowhere you can get a loan with a fixed rate for that long. We're working on the opposite now. We're also working on multi-year fixed income. So, on Pendle, you can get a year-long fixed rate interest. You can get like 10%, and it stays fixed, for example. We're going to offer something similar, but for multiple years. 2 years, 3 years. Hopefully, at some point, it will be 5 or more of fixed income. I think it will be definitely, not I think, it will be the first in DeFi. But the bigger project we're working on is stablecoin as a service. So all of the lessons we've learned through the years since 2020, and all of the things even that we learned and we went through this in this talk, we want to make we know this is extremely difficult for new entrants, and our goal is to make it easier. We want to commoditize stablecoins. We want to democratize them. We want to allow anybody to make their own and to enter that space and experiment and innovate. And so a new project we're working on, very ambitious project called Monolith, is going to allow anybody to create their own stablecoin in 1 minute permissionlessly on basically a dApp. You can use any collateral. We're gonna announce more about that, but that's basically what's next for us. We're gonna move away a little bit from being a stablecoin operator to a stablecoin infrastructure provider. And thank you. Yeah, feel free to reach out.